So I think the biggest benefit of generative AI, at least in the healthcare business, is to revolutionize the clinician user experience. So clinicians, physicians, nurses, whoever, have a difficult time navigating electronic medical records. It's a very unusual and unnatural experience. But dealing with like a chatbot or asking questions or getting responses is a very natural experience. It's the way we relate to each other as people. And if we can create software that is more natural like that, then I think they'll have a much better experience with software like ours.
I think one of the hardest things doctors do is explain to patients what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And so if generative AI allows you to tune, based on an individual's background, that explanation. And I'll give you an example. Say that I'm Nicholai and I have, let's say, uncontrolled diabetes. I don't know anything about diabetes, but I live in Boston. I love the Red Sox. And what generative AI allows you to do is it allows you to then create an analogy in patient education. So perhaps generative AI enables my clinician to create a Red Sox analogy. Nicholai, here's the reason why your diabetes is uncontrolled. It's because you don't know how to base run, for example. And so generative AI allows you more or less to tune or attune your responses or education to an individual and their background.
For me, one of the biggest benefits of generative AI right now is just being able to speak with your computer, so to speak. So it's kind of like that Star Trek vision of saying computer and having it actually understand what you're saying to some extent. Now, it's not perfect and it's an evolving field, but being able to take your own idea of what you want and be able to communicate that to some system and have it be able to do something in response that really kind of matches what you want is something that's totally new, and it's just starting to roll out in more and more applications.
Some of the main benefits of generative AI are a reduction in administrative burden for clinicians to complete their documentation, a more legible, comprehensive and interoperable information, fantastic summaries of complex medical data, disease diagnosis and patient monitoring. My mother died of breast cancer when she was aged 46, when I was 8 years old. I was diagnosed with breast cancer aged 33. Imagine the potential of how different my world could have been if diagnostic and preemptive AI had been in place. And for the future, helping patients understand their own medical journey.
Generative AI can tune a patient's care based on how much they know about healthcare. And so, for example, if a doctor is giving an explanation of a condition, when Nicholai comes in, maybe the generative AI will explain it like a 5-year-old or explain it like a 10-year-old, just because personally I don't know that much about specific conditions. However, if you had, for example, one of the clinicians on our team, they may explain it like a PhD or like a doctor. And so that personalization helps to better get that message across to an individual specifically related. And generative AI can power that.
Benefits of the future. Well, I think now it can answer factual questions, let's say, about the patient, that sort of thing. But if it can really reduce some of the documentation burden, I think that'd be much better. So I'm hoping it'll make healthcare more about the patient, really, and less about the administrative burden.
A great example of generative AI being used to improve or aid processes would be discharge summaries. These pull together huge amounts of clinical data that's been gathered over the patient journey. To gather all this information in a more structured format, which includes important unstructured text, absolutely benefits the receiving clinicians in ongoing patient care.
I think the biggest proof of concepts right now are around documentation, ambient listening to a physician office visit and automatically turning that into documentation. Another area that it's being put to use is in the patient experience front. So responding to patient portal messages, or at least proposing responses, summarizing patient portal messages, identifying which ones are urgent. We're doing a lot of projects regarding that as well.
So what is human in the loop? Human in the loop is a design of a software or any process where, in this case, generative AI provides you a recommendation but doesn't take the action. And so a good example of this is Don's project and work at Bay State, where we actually surface and bring to the top of a message queue what seems like the most urgent messages. Now, the nurse or the human in the loop still has the job of responding to the messages and still has the job of interpreting their content, but the generative AI gave you a nudge in the right direction for which one should be responded to first because they might be urgent.
We are, as part of collaboration between clinical safety, compliance and product teams, developing safe AI principles, which keeps the human in the loop and restricts the scope of generative AI to summarization and clinical decision support.
So bias in AI and in generative AI is a real problem, and it's not solved. Okay, so it really stems from the problem of how these systems are not actually humans. They're not actually really super intelligent things. They are only as smart as the data that's been brought to them and that they've been trained on.
You know, one of the dangers of AI is it allows us to scale up our past biases, very rapidly under the auspices of it's a software. How could software possibly be biased? But it's really trained on our past.
The concern about bias in generative AI is real. AI projects often have a great deal of training data to use. However, as it's usually textual and has, if at all, only been reviewed by a handful of people without any formal documented approach, it's possibly heavily subject to bias.
One of the key things you need to do to eliminate bias is to be conscious of it and to make sure every step of the design process accounts for bias. Number one, pick a project team that's diverse instead of just having kind of the bunch of white guys developing something. Have your data be very transparent. Where did you get your data? How did you label it? What was the group that labeled that data? Were they diverse? Do they represent your community? And then as you validate and test that model, compare it with your different groups. Are underrepresented groups, is it less accurate for underrepresented groups? Or are underrepresented groups getting different kind of results than your sort of majority group? So really every step of the process, you need to be conscious and build in some kind of anti-bias steps, frankly, to have a model that really works well for your community.
So one of the key capabilities that we're bringing to Iris is vector search, which is a way that you can take your private data, your fresh data, and search over it and bring the relevant context to the LLM and to a large language model like ChatGPT and tell it, in addition to the data you were trained on from a year ago, you now have this new fresh data that I know is correct, and use that.
So every time you use generative AI, I propose that you should always have a human in the loop. Always have a clinician or an expert give a thumbs up or a thumbs down and say, yes, this was a good answer, or no, this was a bad answer. And those preferences can actually tune your AI model so that it actually gets better related on who gives those preferences. So the steps that should be implemented to ensure patient confidentiality, privacy, and the legal compliance, I would recommend 2, and I don't think everyone would have the same answer as me, but I would say know your AI provider or AI vendor, and part of that is actually make the investment into having hardware or co-located AI. If you're thinking maybe about non-personal data, or maybe creating analogies, for example, you may not care as much. And outside of healthcare and outside of regulated industries, you probably don't care as much about those 2 points. So I would say think about co-locating your AI and think about doing your due diligence on your AI vendor and their secondary use rights of your data.
One of the subtle issues is the issue of over-reliance on AI. One of our experiences, users, when the computer tells them to do something, they sort of think it's smarter than them. It's artificial intelligence after all. It's sort of black magic. And so they're relying on the model and reducing the use of their own intelligence. And that can be a bad thing. So these models could be hallucinating, saying things very wrong, but if they say it in a clear, coherent, cohesive way, you might overbelieve what they're saying.
Globally, The healthcare burden is growing faster than the workforce, so we need to be more efficient. I think that generative AI will most likely make people's jobs more focused on patient care, so enhance workplace satisfaction and reduce burnout.
We've been mainly focused on making people more productive with good software tools. And if AI is just part of our journey of writing software that helps people do their jobs better and in a more streamlined way, then I think we'll be on the right track.
I think that AI being able to take over your job is a consideration that comes up. There's definitely been technology with us for a long time, over the last, hundreds of years, from the start of the Luddite revolution against the looms and how people dealt with technology revolutions back then, the printing press. All of these things have come in and people have been scared, and then they understand the limitations and how they work around it. The system evolves to overcome it. Gen AI is going to be the same kind of situation. We all want to move to a 4-day work week. We all want to get the worst parts of our jobs automated, and Gen AI is going to hopefully provide that. So there's great promise, but I think there's so much work to be done that we'll always find useful things to do.
There are methods and solutions that people should consider when using generative AI to help mitigate the risks. We, as part of a wider team, are developing safe AI principles to look to ensure human oversight, data transparency, clearly indicating which content was AI generated.
As generative AI gets more and more widely used, I think that there is a potential problem where people are going to not know when AI is being used. And so it is going to embed itself within so many systems that you deal with, and many of those systems are not going to let you know that they're using AI. Then that bias that you're not really knowing about, the bias that is inherent within that system, is going to creep into things that you're just not going to be aware of. So what InterSystems is trying to do, and what we're doing, is setting out some guidelines and some AI being used here, disclaimers, wherever we are putting this into our products, so that people at least understand that AI was used in the generation of some bit of the application that they're seeing.
So to ensure that generative AI in healthcare aligns with InterSystems ethics, really about increasing productivity and not replacing individuals with machines, is all about thinking about our problems in terms of the software that we create and the problems they solve, and how we drive those solutions to the user, the person, the human in the loop, and not think of it as a replacement or an automation.
So I think that the places that where AI is going to be the most beneficial is how it can now be fed so much more information about the world at the subcellular level, at the physical material level, just that understanding of how to improve our materials and improve our drugs, our drug making, and just our systems in general. Being able to kind of work in that realm of improving those things that humans can do, but now can be done much more automated and much more efficiently, is going to just provide so many benefits that we're just not even going to really realize it happening. But hopefully, in the same time it's making all of those scientists' jobs easier, it's going to improve everybody's life.